Sedinam Curry and Darryl Perry. I'm Judy Grill, and this is the Presidential Debate Series. Welcome to the Presidential Debate Series. I'm your host, Judy Grill. Today we have two candidates from the Green and Libertarian parties. Joining us in the studio is Sedinam, Kinamo, Christin, Moyowasifza-Curry of the Green Party. She has a 35-year track record in program and project management, in which she was called on to produce, manage, and evaluate techniques in community, public and media affairs and relations. She has worked for clients in business and in educational, social, environmental, political, economic, cultural exchange, and heritage-based programs. And joining us via Skype is Darryl Perry of the Libertarian Party. Mr. Perry is the owner and managing editor of Free Press Publications, a business he started in June 2009. He is an award-winning author, publisher, and radio TV host, and is a regular contributor to several weekly and monthly newspapers. He hosts the daily newscast, FPP Radio News, the podcast Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, and the weekly news podcast, FPP Freedom Minute, and is a regular co-host on Free Talk Live. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
You're
for having
welcome.
me on.
You're
Thank
most
you.
welcome. Let's start with domestic policy. Mr. Perry, libertarians are typically skeptical about climate change. Do you believe that climate change is happening? And if so, what do you think ought to be done about it?
That's an interesting question, and one can just look at, the statistics and see that yes, climates do change. The real question is whether or not all of the change in the climate is caused because of government, or if it's a naturally occurring phenomenon. And this is my position. This is not necessarily the position of the Libertarian Party. I think that there might be, some correlation between man and the change in the climate, but the solution is not government. And that's generally what you hear from Republicans and Democrats is, well, we need this government program or that government program, and then we can wind up, curing all of these problems that are quite frankly caused because of government involvement in various ways. So if we removed the government from the equation altogether and allowed a free market to exist, then you would not see pollution happening, because right now pollution is allowed because of government, to where governments say it's acceptable to pollute your neighbor's water or pollute your neighbor's land to a certain degree. So if you remove those protections that allow pollution to happen, you would not have that in a free market. So the solution is to get the government out of the way.
Sedinam,
Yes, Judy.
how do you feel about that? Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree, and I'm horrified.
Horrified. Can
That
you
is
please
the answer.
explain?
Three things. We are Greens. We made being green important. Since 1945, the human species, there's only one race and it's human, has caused the ability for us to annihilate ourselves. It is definitely human behavior that has caused the climate conflicts that we're having on the earth. So since 1945, we've been able to kill ourselves. We are accelerating our demise as human beings through the use of fossil fuels that we're taking out of the ground, our Western lifestyle. In the Green Party, we have ecological wisdom as one of our 4 pillars. So definitely I'm scared of what he said, because without government doing an effective job, capitalists will continue to rape, rob, and pillage the earth.
The Green Party calls for subsidies for renewable energy.
Yes.
And economists, they argue that these subsidies distort the energy market. So how could you, what would you respond to that?
I have to step back. Our nation was founded on flawed logic. They used free labor of black folk to help build an economy that accelerated growth, which is unheard of in the world because they had free labor. It wasn't free, it was enslaved black folks. So the economy is based on that logic, which is flawed. So to move it to where you're saying, if we actually subsidized and made government more involved in, we have another pillar called community-based economics and grassroots democracy. If every American was bought into a local community, then you would not have the need, because we would have people doing more to help themselves build their local economy. The dollar would circulate more. That's not based on logic. It's based on a kind of skewed understanding of economy based on enslavement labor.
Darryl, how do you, what would be your response to that?
So I'm all in favor of renewable energy, but I'm completely opposed to subsidies. And the Libertarian Party opposes subsidies because what subsidies do is they pick winners and losers. And government should not be in the position of determining which businesses succeed and which businesses fail. And that's what subsidies do, is subsidies wind up being given to businesses to give them an unfair advantage so that they are able to sort of take advantage of an area, take advantage of a resource. And in a lot of cases, they take advantage of human capital as well. So if you get rid of the subsidies, then you remove the government from the equation of trying to determine who succeeds and who fails. And a business should either succeed or fail on its own merit, not because they're politically connected.
The Green Party calls for a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Now,
Yes.
how would you sell this idea to small businesses and that employ just a few people?
That's not very hard to do. Everybody wants to make a livable wage. Business owners, shareholders, and workers. If you are ripping off people from living decently, what kind of business model do you have? You have to have your plan in place as a business to see about making sure you add value to your product or your service so that customers, as he said, are willing to pay without interference. Competition's not dangerous. We just have to make better products so that people are willing to pay that, which helps ensure that workers get $15 an hour.
I am completely opposed to raising the minimum wage at all for any amount. I realize that most states wind up having these automatic cost of living adjustments, but the federal rate of $7.25, I think if there is to be a minimum wage, it should not be raised. It should stay where it is. And that's not saying that I believe that somebody doing a high-skilled job should only make $7.25. I actually think that prices of labor should be negotiated between the employer and the employee. Now, what you would have happen if you basically double the cost of labor, small mom-and-pop businesses that only employ one or two people to sort of complement the labor of mom and pop, who are business owner plus employee for themselves, if you double their labor cost, then somebody is either going to wind up losing a job, and somebody is generally a high school student that is trying to earn a little bit of extra income. So basically what you're telling the high school student is, if you are not allowed to make $15 an hour, you can't work. Now, that's what happens when you set a minimum wage, is you tell people, if you don't have $15 worth of labor, or if your labor is not valued at $15, you get $0, and you get to stay at home, Or you can maybe try to find a job in the black market or work under the table, in which case you could wind up going to jail for simply trying to make some money.
Go ahead.
This is the reality. The government subsidizes health care for the majority of workers because they cannot, the companies are not paying the wages nor giving the benefits. So we have to be honest, the majority of folks at Walmart get government food stamps and insurance.
Yeah.
This is not a high school student. These are adults who are working at Walmart and Target or all these other companies that don't pay decent wages. So not only do they not have time
Neither
for
of those places pay minimum wage.
Pardon?
Neither of those places pay their starting workers minimum wage.
That's my point. These people cannot afford even health care, and they are on food stamps, government subsidies, why the owners put up museums, do all kinds of stuff that benefit humanity, but not their workers.
Okay, I have to ask Mr. Perry a question.
Certainly.
You called Social Security a Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
And how would you, what would you do about the millions of Americans who depend upon Social Security for their sustenance?
Well, we need to find a way to phase out Social Security as it currently exists, to where you don't have people that are paying into a system that they're never going to wind up getting any benefit from. So there are people that are younger than I that are working, they're paying Social Security taxes, and in 40, 50 years when it's time for them to retire, there's not going to be money in Social Security to wind up giving them their benefit. In fact, I've been hearing for most of my adult life that Social Security is insolvent, meaning that there's not money in the Social Security fund. They keep pulling it from the general fund to cover for Social Security because it is a Ponzi scheme. Ponzi scheme means that you're taking money from new investors and giving to people that invested a long time ago. Ponzi schemes never, never, never work in the long run. And Social Security is exactly that. You're taking money from workers now and giving to people that have already retired. And yes, it is true that there was, some sort of contracted agreement of people paid into Social Security and they were promised an amount of money in return. And it's something, again, I would love to phase out, but I need to sit down and figure out, and that's not something that I could really do now. I would have to wind up being in the White House to figure out the way to actually phase out Social Security to where people that are currently receiving would continue getting a benefit, but the people that no longer want to pay into the system would not be forced to pay into a system.
Can I have a comment? Sedinam, can I have a comment on Social Security?
Yeah, Social Security is one of the most successful government programs. It allows Americans who are aging to have a permanent source of income, whether they are healthy or not. I think it's dangerous for any government to deny their citizens retirement. They should even we should give more money and more benefits. I have seen personally my family members, my dad, my mother, who worked, put into this scheme, and they received their benefits. It is not insolvent. It's good to 2027 if governments start picking on it. It is something we pay for. It's government that needs to relook at how they are mismanaging it, but it is okay. It's in the black.
Okay, thank you both. Mr. Perry, you call for abolishing the Department of Education. Could you please explain the benefits this would have on ordinary school districts?
Well, first, I would like to hear a benefit for having the Federal Department of Education. The Federal Department of Education did not exist until the 1970s. And I'm not the first or the only candidate to ever say that they want to abolish the Department of Education. And I see no benefit of having the federal government involved in education at all. In fact, I don't think that state government should be involved in education. I think that parents and the students should be involved in their education, and forcing people to fund the education of someone else's child, again, it's immoral because it's theft. When you take money from one person by force or a threat of force, and that's what taxes are, you're taking money by force. If you don't pay a tax, then some government agent will come and say, no, you have to pay your tax. And if you still don't comply, they will throw you in jail for failure to pay taxes. So when you're funding things through theft and force and threats of force, that's immoral. And it doesn't matter if it's for the greater good or not, it's immoral. And again, education should be left up to the parents and the students. I fully support homeschooling and unschooling.
How do you feel about this, Sedinam, please?
We are human beings. Yes or no? We are not animals. I'm a Head Start baby.
Oh.
The government did research to say, and they saw that not having early childhood education affects the ability of children to go to college, be successful, and own businesses. Government should take care of us. The United Nations has the Millennium Goals: water, food, housing, shelter, education. Education is just critical to have voters who are critical thinkers. Mm-hmm. This is dangerous logic, he's saying. Mm-hmm. Education in most developed countries mm-hmm. is free up into your PhD mm-hmm. level. Our nation lags behind. I think we're number 55. Mm-hmm. I'm from a state, California, that put one of the greatest systems from mm-hmm. junior college mm-hmm. to state-run college to universities. It's the depletion, taking it away, that has dummied down our whole state, and it's affecting our nation. If people were critical thinkers from a very early age through public education that was free, we'd have a greater nation that was more intellectual, more critical thinking, and advanced in our understanding about the environment, about money, about humanity. We lack sense in our country. Mm-hmm.
I'm not opposed to education at all. I love learning, and it's something that I do in my spare time is I self-educate. And I know people that homeschool their children. I know people that unschool their children. And the people that I know that are homeschooled and unschooled are actually more intelligent on average than people that wind up going to the government-run schools. So when I say, get rid of the Department of Education, I am not saying close down every school and don't let anybody learn. I'm not saying burn books. What I am saying is stop funding education through the coercive tax system.
But what would you say to this, that perhaps a majority of people don't feel they're qualified to be homeschoolers, teachers?
That there are private schools that, if you look at the statistics, they do a much better job at somewhere between 2/3 to half the cost of what the government-run schools operate at. So if you remove the taxation that is used to fund education, the government-run education, then people would have the money in order to be able to send their kids to a private school that does a better job at a lower cost per student.
Do you have a final comment? Okay.
It's really important, Darryl, that we understand a few things. I'm a Black American. Government has been the only entity, not people's humanity, to ensure that my rights are protected. For education, we had to do integration. People just didn't think that you and I could sit together and learn and talk. If it wasn't for government, big government may have hurt a lot of people, but government has been a protector of my rights and liberty as a Black American. So I believe we need government to help step in, to help ensure that our humanity is protected and uplifted.
Sedinam, 60 years ago, it was governments that were infringing on the rights of your family. The segregation that happened in the South was government-mandated segregation. It was business owners that worked in conjunction with the civil rights protesters that desegregated the lunch counter. And yes, there were government laws that came in to repeal the previous government laws, but it must be, it must be reiterated time and again that the segregation and a lot of the discrimination that happened, and I'm not defending that at all. I think it's absolutely hideous and horrible, but it happened because of government, not in spite of.
Yeah, go ahead.
Darryl, then we have to go back to the beginning. Our nation, as I mentioned earlier, is flawed. It was founded on the backs of my ancestors. There's a
I
doctrine.
completely agree with you.
Do you know about the doctrine of discovery?
I don't think I've ever heard of that.
520 years ago, European monarchs decided that they would go out and discover the world that exists. And if they found another European monarch, they would not fight them. But if they found folks of color or people that weren't European, ancestry like yourself, I think, they would take them over. This set up the whole world to encapsulize white privilege and white supremacy. That came also to our nation. Though folks were leaving a bad situation from their European ancestors, they came here and didn't allow my ancestors to be free here.
Okay, thank you
Yeah, and
so
I'm not trying to defend that at all. I think that's absolutely hideous. And if I could somehow apologize for what happened, I would do so.
Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate
Thank
it.
you. I'm going to change the subject,
Okay.
go on to another question.
Okay.
And this one is for you, Sedinam.
Okay.
The Green Party platform calls for restricting the size and the concentrated power of corporations. How exactly would you do that?
First and foremost, we believe in grassroots democracy and decentralization. We believe every community should have a stake in the key things: water, education, banking. So we believe in, community banks. So we would ensure that every American was a stakeholder within their own community. And if they move, their shares move with them somewhere else.
Nice.
It's that simple.
You have a comment for this, Darryl?
I'll address your question about corporations
Okay.
and having too much power. And again, it goes back to government, to where governments have created this situation, to where governments grant corporations powers, to where governments, along with the powers they grant the corporations, they give them certain liabilities. So when the BP oil spill happened back, 6 years ago now, BP was limited in the amount of monies that they had to pay for cleanup. Had a free market existed, BP would have had to have paid for the entire cleanup. It would not have been capped at some arbitrary amount and then government saying, we'll take over from here and we're protecting you. So the things with corporations, most of the evil that happens from corporations is directly because government allows them to do it and nobody can be held liable.
How about a comment?
Yes, the issue is public elections. Because we don't have a public election system, corporations and 158 wealthy families dictate and determine our policies. Darryl, you and I are the outside of that. We don't take up corporate money. So if we knock out corporate money, then elected officials like you and I could be would only have to answer to the American citizenry. So it's the root of evil is money in politics. Would you agree?
I'm not so sure that I would. I do agree that, what's the saying when politicians control the economy, the first thing to be bought is a politician. So I completely agree there that, the government should not be manipulating the economy, therefore corporations can't manipulate the politicians.
Right.
But I don't think that you can ever remove money from elections, because elections have to be funded somehow, to where, campaign signs have to be purchased somehow. And if you say, well, let's give all of the candidates the same amount of money to begin with, well, how do you determine who's a candidate? How do you determine who gets the money? And then you're only setting them up as, equal on paper in one category. People are not equal in their presentation of their ideas. People are not equal in their presentability. People are not equal in their likability. People are not equal in the way they determine who to hire to manage their campaigns. They're not equal in how they decide to spend the money once they have the money. So if the claim is, and I'm not sure this is necessarily what you're claiming, but if the claim is, if we give every candidate the same amount of money, then elections will actually be fair, I don't think I can agree with that.
Thank you. I'm going to move along here to foreign policy. Darryl, you call for pulling the United States out of the United Nations. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, certainly. So the United Nations, of course, was founded in 1945 after the end of World War II. And ever since, there have been all sorts of various treaties that the U.S. has been basically forced into because of the United Nations. There are various things to where the United Nations has tried cramming down various treaties onto the U.S. government, and some of those have been rejected, some of them not so much. But the United Nations, as far as I see, is not serving any benefit to the American people, but the United States government and the U.S. taxpayers are having to fund the existence of this entity and put up a giant building in downtown Manhattan and, here, UN, have some land and have our money, and it does absolutely nothing to protect me, it does nothing to protect you. So it serves no legitimate purpose, let's get rid of it.
Quick comment, Sedinam?
Three things, Darryl.
Three things,
Three
okay.
things. One, we are a species. We have to have a way to relate and connect to each other. We share air and water and dirt. We need to negotiate with each other and make sure we're protecting our species. So we need to meet and talk about that. Two, our nation has been a bully in the UN. I don't like the role we've played. We have created levels of importancy. We've made European powers more important than the other nations. That's not acceptable. Two, corporate interest has infiltrated the UN and capitalism is king. And I don't like that. But it's necessary to meet and talk till we can understand each other as a species. I disagree that we should dissolve it, but we need to be better.
Okay, that's all we have time for. We'd like to thank Sedinam Curry of the Green Party and Darryl Perry of the Libertarian Party for joining us on the show. And thank you for watching the Presidential Debate Series. I'm Judy Grill. We'll see you next time.